For many people, it's going to be a mayday. Too much labor is required to achieve something better in your life, in everyone's life. Let it be a mayday every day. Welcome once again to News Analysis. News Analysis, a weekly magazine on current affairs. To begin with the main points in a nutshell. Libya, Gaddafi says he won't be forced from his country. U.S. tobacco firms win Missouri hospital case. U.S. stem cell research funding ban lifted by court. China releases prominent human rights lawyer Teng Biao. New European Union regulations on herbal medicines come into force. Royal newlyweds celebrate Buckingham Palace. And now the news in detail. Libya, Gaddafi says he won't be forced from his country. Libyan leader Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi has said that no one can force him to leave his country. In a speech on a state TV, Colonel Gaddafi also called for talks with NATO, which has been conducting airstrikes under a mandate to protect Libyan citizens. State media later implied that NATO strikes had targeted Colonel Gaddafi while he was speaking. Meanwhile, Libya said it will not allow any more sea deliveries to the besieged western city of Misrata. Government spokesman Musa Ibrahim also said rebels in the city would be given 4 days to lay down their arms in return for an amnesty. If they continue to fight, they would face total fire, he said. His comments came after NATO said forces loyal to Colonel Gaddafi had been trying to lay mines off Misrata. Leader targeted appearing on state TV in the early hours of Saturday. Colonel Gaddafi dismissed an early effort to force him into exile. The U.S. and its allies have reportedly tried to sound out countries which might be willing to offer Colonel Gaddafi asylum. If they continued to fight, they would face total fire, he said. U.S. tobacco firms win Missouri hospital's case. 6 major U.S. tobacco companies have defeated a lawsuit by hospitals seeking compensation for treating patients with smoking-related illnesses. 37 hospitals in the state of Missouri had claimed cigarette companies delivered an unreasonably dangerous product. They sought more than $455 million reimbursement for treating uninsured smokers who had not paid for care. The hospitals treat many destitute, non-paying patients also. They said medical ethics required them to treat people in need, regardless of their ability to pay. In the case, the hospitals claimed that tobacco companies manipulated the nicotine content in cigarettes and misrepresented the health effects of the smoking. But a jury in St. Louis rejected their claim. The jury agreed with Philip Morris USA that ordinary cigarettes are not negligently designed or defective, said Mirek Garnick of Philip Morris. An official from Lorillard and Company in the case said compelling evidence was presented to the jury, including testimony from hospital witnesses that confirmed the hospitals were not financially damaged as they asserted. U.S. stem cell research funding ban lifted by court. A U.S. appeals court has overturned an earlier order to suspend federal funding of stem cell research. The Washington court said opponents of the research say it is illegal because it involved destruction of human embryos were unlikely to succeed in their lawsuit to stop the funding. The ruling marks significant victory for U.S. President Barack Obama, correspondents say. President Obama lifted a ban on funding for stem cell research in March 2009. Soon after, U.S. District Judge Royce Lamberth issued a temporary injunction on the move while a legal challenge went ahead, although the suspension was itself overruled on appeal pending of a final decision. The U.S. Court of Appeals in Washington ruled 2-1 on Friday that a 1996 U.S. law against federal funding of embryo destruction was ambiguous and did not prohibit funding a research project in which NESC, embryonic stem cell, will be used. Scientists say the research could lead to breakthroughs for treatment of spinal cord injuries and disease including Alzheimer's and Parkinsonism. Opponents, who include religious groups, argue that the research is unethical and illegal. The suit opposing federal funding, which was also backed by some Christian groups, was brought against the National Institute of Health, NIH. The NIH and the White House both welcomed Friday's ruling. This is a momentous day not only for the science but for the hopes of thousands of patients and their families who are relying on NIH-funded scientists to pursue life-saving discoveries and therapies that could come from stem cell research, NIH Director Francis Collins said in a statement. White House spokesman Nick Pappas said the decision was a victory for scientists and patients. Responsible stem cell research has been the potential to treat some of our most devastating diseases and conditions and offers hope to families across the country and around the world, he continued. China releases prominent human rights lawyer Teng Biao. The Chinese authorities have released a prominent Chinese human rights lawyer, Teng Biao, after 70 days in custody. Rights groups say he was freed on Friday afternoon and his wife was quoted as saying that he's okay. Mr. Teng's release came shortly after China and the U.S. held 2 days of talks on human rights issues in Beijing. But in a separate development, another well-known Chinese human rights lawyer, Li Fangping, has disappeared, human rights groups said. His alleged disappearance the very same day suggests that the security forces are conducting a carefully planned assault on outspoken human rights offenders in a calculated effort to eviscerate China's rights defense movement. Philip Kine, the New York-based Human Rights Watch organization, was quoted as saying by the AFP news agency. China has not publicly commented on the reports of Li's disappearance. The advocacy group China Aid said both Mr. Teng and Mr. Li were members of the Chinese Christian Rights Defense Association. Friday's release of Teng followed the talks in between Chinese officials and U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Michael Ponser in Beijing. Mr. Ponser told reporters that he had voiced Washington's deep concerns about the crackdown on dissidents and human rights activists, following appeals on the internet for mass protests similar to those that have rocked a number of Arab countries.